Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance into another episode of the new Untouchables. This is our 77th offering in the course of a year, and it gets more prolific and profound each and every week, and this week is no exception. We are recording this on Friday, May 15th, 2026, after a week of just more insanity, if that's even possible, but I think we continue to I don't know if we're surprised anymore, but at the same time, just seeing our president in China amidst things like suing the IRS for $10 billion dollars, and of course, maybe less threatening with that and saying, let's put together a slush fund for those friends of mine that I create pardons for. Yeah, Mr. Pelletier, for example, having worked at the Department of Justice forever, saw this sort of thing in third world countries, I would imagine, for a good portion of his career. And yet it's come home to roost. Now, I want to get started with setting the tone first and foremost with a little bit of levity because of just how incredibly and profoundly unnerving and disturbing all of this has become. But last night, I happened to see one of those moments on network television that could only be delivered by the great David Letterman. And I'm going to share my screen. And it was for our friend Stephen Colbert's final days as it pertains to CBS and all things the mega acquisition, of course, of the Ellisons, and really having bought almost all of media in that particular situation to create a huge monopoly, which, of course, these fine people could tell us about antitrust all day. But I think this would really set the tone in a fun way to get things started. So I'm just going to show some of it, but let's get this clip on here.
Dave, I'm telling the folks out there watching TV where we
celebrate them because that is a huge milestone. So everybody, like thumbs up. You know the.
Would you share with people why we are on the roof of the Edsel?
Oh, right. Now I thought maybe tonight's occasion would be a little sad, being the end of your run here, but this brings true joy to my heart. We are up here for the wanton destruction of CBS property.
I know for many years I enjoyed this as a viewer. You throw things off the Edsel building. This is a true story. When I first got this gig, one of the first things they told me before we even moved into the offices that I would not be allowed to throw anything off of the roof of the Ed Sullivan building because evidently there was a problem with a previous tenant.
Yes, I'm so excited about this.
So am I. All right, so I was never allowed to do this.
You never did it, and all the time.
I never did it, but we're at the end here, so all bets are off.
Let's get to it.
Let's go. All right.
Now these are the guys that did the heavy work for us, Chris and Gene.
Yeah.
Hi guys.
Chris and Gene. Guys, thanks for your help.
You guys will verify that this is actually CBS property, right?
100%, yes.
Okay, anytime you're ready, Stephen.
All right.
Oh,
now,
my
wait a second,
God.
guys, before we do this, Dave, I think we should have a target, don't you?
Right down there, my friend.
Something circular, like a
right
bullseye?
down there. Yeah.
What you got?
Yeah. It's all fun until somebody puts out an eye.
Yeah. That too.
There we go. Get ready. Oh, my God. Yes. Oh. We missed the target, but still, that.
So I could let that run on, but I was having some buffering problems. But it goes on to show David Letterman and Stephen Colbert really having a lot of fun mocking CBS at the moment, of course, of this mega merger and all things what we've seen, especially through 60 Minutes. And I decided that was relevant because I first discovered Dick Bowen as the subject of 60 Minutes, which was at that time, I believe, the most watched 60 Minutes episode of a very long time. It was profound. Dick Bowen, who is on my left here, who is a former chief regulator at Citigroup, of all places, who did one of the most heroic acts of whistleblowing in our country's history to make clear that what Citibank was doing was literally packing into what is known as reps and warranties, the way we sell securities in Wall Street, that he was doing his job as an internal stopgap to make sure that everything was exactly as it was supposed to be in the prospectus for, of course, giant, investors from whether they're huge pensions, maybe countries, all of those sorts of things we're talking about millions of investors. And Richard Bowen had the guts and the commitment to do his job in a way that under then, as I recall, the law Sarbanes-Oxley that was demonstrated, or excuse me, put into play during the Bush II administration to deal with making sure that the boards and the CEOs of companies would be held accountable for what would otherwise be corporate malfeasance, of course, if you could prove it. And here was an insider, Richard Bowen, who basically put it all on the line. An incredibly important career, a long career as a banker, and he wouldn't have gotten to that level if he hadn't, obviously been somebody of great value to a giant company. And he literally started to find strange things. In fact, our friend William Black had made a shirt later that said, first we saw, then we asked questions or something to that effect, and then things got weird. And what that was implementing, based on an initiative that Bill Black created many years ago called the Bank Whistleblower United, was to reveal all the internal mechanics of how every time that people doing their job had the courage and integrity to continue to do their job, and when they brought up all of the red flags that were taking place because of enormous fraud, they basically met with silence. The corporate boards would circle the wagons. They cut it off. And because Richard is such a professional and such a dignified person, he didn't just stop with basically going to his superiors. He continued to move the information up the food chain to where eventually, and I'm making this a very shortcut version, but he would eventually send an email directly to former chairman of the board, Robert Rubin, who was, of course, the former Treasury Secretary during the Clinton administration, who was the former CEO of Goldman Sachs. And in that scenario, the nature of, obviously, Sarbanes-Oxley is that you're making the board of directors clear that the system itself had, let's just call it clear and present danger. That's not the legal term. But the bottom line is, and the way his story led him to 60 Minutes was because they quashed him. They made sure that nobody acted upon his information, and that's when it got even weirder. I'm not going to go into the entirety of the story. But as a result of that, we found Richard. Richard appeared in the con with this tremendous group of people where I feel like we revealed what the entire federal government couldn't do. And thank God you guys have had the heroism to give us your everything to be able to showcase that to the American people, which that's another story in itself. But ultimately, this past week, a gentleman by the name of Michael Winston passed away. Michael Winston was shall we say, a colleague in his honor and his integrity as an executive, trying to do the same thing for a different company as it related to the largest subprime lender in the country at that time called Countrywide. And I'm going to play just briefly a clip, and I hope it doesn't butcher it, but from our work, The Con, that shows what Michael Winston was up against.
Before his time in the mortgage industry, Michael Winston had made a name for himself helping to grow such companies as McDonnell Douglas, Motorola, and Merrill Lynch into well-oiled corporate titans. But during his time at Merrill Lynch, he received an out-of-the-blue recruitment call from an up-and-coming California mortgage lender who desperately wanted him to bring his talents to the West Coast. The lender who, incidentally, happened to be responsible for Addie Polk's loan. Countrywide.
I remember vividly Countrywide, how and when they recruited me. Angelo Mazzillo was the CEO of the year, and Fortune had an article called the 24,000% growth company, Countrywide. It was on the cover. And they said, we're not used to such growth. You've helped companies become a growth engine before. We want you to make us Goldman Sachs on the Pacific. Come here and do that, and you'll be a hero.
After initial skepticism about joining this relative newcomer to the Fortune 500 scene, Michael eventually accepted the offer. After all, Angelo Mazzillo's mission for the company seemed laudable enough to warrant taking the leap on this new venture.
Mortgages are special because they do make such a difference in people's lives. I witnessed that every single day, and I particularly witnessed it when I took loan applications and saw the excitement of people with the opportunity of getting into a home ownership changes a society.
Michael embarked on this new adventure with enthusiasm, excited about the prospects of helping to grow what appeared to be an already great company into a remarkable one. Yet it didn't even take a full week on the job for the first red flag to go up.
On one occasion, I parked in the front and I passed a car that said Fundum on the plates. A guy came right from that car. Whether he was the owner or was parking it for the owner, I have no idea. But I said, Fundum, that's sort of an interesting plate. What do you suppose it means? And he said, oh, I know what it means. It's Angelo Mazzillo's growth strategy for 2006. Now, I've heard of growth strategies moving from domestic to global, moving from products to systems. Fundum is a growth strategy? How can that be a growth strategy? Oh, we're going to fund all loans. What do you mean you're going to fund all loans? What if the person doesn't have a job? And he said, fund him. What if he doesn't have a job and doesn't have any assets? Fund him. And finally I said, I don't understand. What criteria do you use in determining if somebody should get a loan? And he smiled very smugly and he said, if they can fog a mirror, we'll give them a loan.
Experience told Michael that no CEO.
So, on that note, Mr. Bowen, it is a great honor and
oh gosh. Oh, thank you,
really,
Patrick.
yeah, Michael Winston. I mean,
the guy was incredible. He and I were brothers from different mothers, and it's just in going through all of this together, and and trying to get something done with the industry. After he had been thrown out and I had been thrown out of Citigroup, and we got with Bill Black and Gary and formed Bank Whistleblowers United. We're trying to make a difference, I know this is what you guys are still trying to do today, but we tried. We actually did try, and I will tell you that I've mentioned this before. Louis Clark and the Government Accountability Project. With regard to me, I'm convinced that's the only reason I survived. Is Louis, the original attorney I had, quite frankly, was not entirely up to snuff. And fortunately, I found Louis and Gap, and they came into my corner, and that is the only reason that I survived. So, it's incredible. And obviously, there were no prosecutions made. And we tried with Bank Whistleblowers United to come up with a platform, even with the presidential race that was going on in 2016. Remember that Bill? And trying to make some changes. And we were not successful.
We could toss it to everybody, but I'd like to toss it to Mr. Clark, Louis Clark, the executive director of the Government Accountability Project. There's just some powerful words from Mr. Bowen, and you represented both Mr. Bowen and Mr. Winston. What are your thoughts?
Well, a great sadness in as much as the decisions at the Justice Department at the top of our government was to look forward and not backward, and therefore not hold accountable the people who brought not only our own financial system to the brink of this total disaster, but the entire world's economy. And so I definitely, I mean, it was an honor to represent those two incredible people, those incredible truth tellers. That was a great honor, and our morale was through the roof being just associated with them. The sadness is that the system did not come through and make any meaningful change other than to save the institutions that brought us into the difficulty to start with, but held no one accountable. No banker was even prosecuted, even threatened with prosecution, as far as I know. And the just 60 Minutes piece that you mentioned that Dick Bowen was on itself was an indictment of the Attorney General of the United States, deciding that it was too risky to hold the financial institutions, Citigroup and others, responsible for what they had done to our economy.
I feel like it could go to either Paul or Bill here, but William K. Black, the legendary prosecutor, regulator, all things savings and loan crisis, and your involvement, of course, like what Richard just mentioned. Your initiation of the Bank Whistleblower United initiative was really what led us to the con. That's what germinated the con. That's how we were able to move forward and get the resources to put it all together. What are your thoughts on the passing of obviously Michael and what Dick just said, and obviously off the heels of what Lewis just said?
So I'm on with two of the people I most respect, and we've just lost the third that I most respected. So in addition, let me just mention, Michael was severely ill for years. And this is from sick building syndrome as well. And so the courage, he kept going when he could barely rasp out a sentence.
Right.
And I want to thank his family. I don't know them, but I know his son was often there for him. It took him years of suffering to, he fought that battle like he fought every other battle, long and hard on it. So that's my primary thing as a human being. I want to also explain, it's actually an economic concept, opportunity cost. The opportunity cost of the Attorney General of the United States, and really the President to some extent of the United States, deciding not to enforce the law against the most elite criminals that produced the great financial crisis. And again, I'll tell you, the best estimate of economists in present value is that it cost $41.7 trillion in lost GDP. Let that run around in the head for a while. Now, let me add the other hat. I was never a prosecutor. I was, lead witness, expert witness in prosecutions in top 100 cases. So I'll leave to Paul that true area of expertise. But I was a litigation director. I was an enforcement director, and I led investigations of these kinds of people in the savings and loan debacle. And I want to tell you something that I've been emphasizing in this, in prior programs. And that is the United States has more whistleblowers than the rest of the world combined. But on top of that, there's just no comparison to the high level whistleblowers. And I'm not saying that the height of your position is a measure of the human being. But I am saying that from a standpoint of an enforcement director, a litigation director, an investigator, they are so incredibly valuable because they were in the room or in direct communication often with the CEO that you should be prosecuting. And often they put the CEO on notice, and their actions in response to that notice would be the ideal thing for a prosecutor. I'll again hand off to Paul when we get there about how valuable that is. And these were two whistleblowers who put the absolute top person in the organization on personal notice. Now, that's incredibly risky, right? And by the way, the guy on right now, he's not just a whistleblower, he's a serial whistleblower. Richard became, in essence, the top internal auditor for a massive section of Citi. But he wrote directly to put on notice, as Patrick, you were alluding to, under the Act. And that is incredibly valuable to prosecutors and civil litigators and such. But he also knew where all the key documents were. And here's another thing more subtle that, again, Gap knows. Good people promote good people, find good people. So one of Richard's principal deputies, I don't know her exact position, became a whistleblower as well. So the integrity breeds integrity. Conversely, just to mention to the modern times, the original orange man with that weird orange tint, that was the head of Countrywide. Looked just like Trump.
That's right.
A friend of Angelo group of prominent people, particularly politicians, they would do special deals for. And he was the guy that first brought, and you love it, artificial intelligence to the loan underwriting system and took all kinds of credit for it. But as you just heard, it was completely Potemkin. And what that meant is Angelo also had we would call it in law, a most favored nations clause. And what that means is if anybody was willing to make the loan, Countrywide would make the loan, regardless of what its underwriting said. And that's what led this complete race to the bottom. And that's what put Countrywide at the bottom of the bottom, or the top of the thing, crashing into the bottom. And Paul has already mentioned, I'll just hand it to him on this, that the SEC complaint on Countrywide was essentially a criminal indictment. It needed a few other clauses and such. So there is no excuse for the failure to prosecute. Again, I'll just end with my thanks and to the audience. You're able to hear from these people who, lots of people talk tough, like Trump. These are people that never talk tough. They just demonstrated it with their courage and their integrity. And God bless you. Thank you.
Now I'm going to turn this to you, Paul, just like Bill just alluded to, but I want to tee up something because when I first met you, one of the first things you said to me, and Paul Pelletier, ladies and gentlemen, 3 decades long, nearly 3 decades, veteran of the Department of Justice, senior prosecutor, basically trained the whole department, involved with some of the biggest cases in the history of the United States, covered by every, the best journalists that exist. Paul Pelletier is a guy who's been there, done that, and he knows exactly who Richard Bowen is. He said to us on many occasions how important Richard Bowen is. But he also told me the very first time I met him that one of the biggest signals that was just a farce was the failure, I believe, to rein in Angelo Mazzillo, considering the information we have. Whatever direction you want to go, Paul, it's up to you. But I remember that, given everybody's, sentiment at the moment.
I think what I said is when the U.S. attorney in Central District of California announced within 6 weeks of the settlement of the SEC case that he was not going to prosecute Mazzillo, that's when I snapped. And that's when I knew everything was wrong and everything was off and the DOJ had lost the battle. So and I still believe that today. But I have always been humbled to be in the presence of Mr. Bowen and Michael. It's what Bill has said about whistleblowers is sort of in spades harder for whistleblowers. And when I say that, I mean, first of all, as prosecutors, we can't do our job in a lot of ways without whistleblowers. But the difference between whistleblowers and cooperators, so to speak, whistleblowers are there from Jump Street, right? And what makes their job harder is they have to raise their hand, and the fact that they raise their hand usually is the death knell for them in whatever their occupation is. Most whistleblowers I ever deal with become unemployable, and they become a pariah in their industries, principally because they did the right thing. And so it is, and particularly, I remember how important the whistleblower was that we have. I'm sorry, I forget her name in the Enron case, right? She was a terrific lady. Also, I think she was the CFO at the time. Also ruined her career, but also was just terrific. And what Bill says is that these people have a bird's eye view of the crime, but more importantly, they're the ones who see the smoke coming out the windows and try and do something about it. A cooperator, and I always loved working with whistleblowers because they were sort of the only clean people that you were going to deal with other than the victims. And a cooperator also has a bird's eye view to the crime, but he participated in committing the crime, right? So it's a lot easier for that person to, because of the plea bargaining, a lot easier for that person to sort of rat out other people. Which is not the same for whistleblowers. So anyway, Dick, I respect you immensely. I'm always humbled to be in your presence, and thanks for joining us. But to sort of end, not to end the story, but sort of to carry it through to today. First of all, it's great when you can reward the whistleblowers. And in cases like Enron, we did. This case was even worse because during the great financial crisis, none of the whistleblowers effectively got vindicated because we didn't prosecute anybody. So that made it triply bad, right? But I think that one of the things, one of the takeaways that's sort of a little bit different is, and Bill sort of alluded to it, is at least in other cases, you do something. We had Sarbanes-Oxley, and it was actually Sarbanes-Oxley that gave us the framework to prosecute the cases that you were whistleblowing on, right? And so it was a wonderful thing. When after the great financial crisis, we had nothing other than an amalgamation of a whole bunch of laws that I think that they're still doing rulemaking on. And Barney Frank, bless his soul, he's in hospital now. He's dying, but the laws that he promoted were so complex and so complicated. They really didn't, to me, provide any basis to either to curb the excesses that were really going on or to prosecute them in the future, like Sarbanes-Oxley did. But we see what happens when you don't prosecute cases, right? Part of what happened after the great financial crisis, we're living what happens now on what happens when you don't prosecute cases. And and we are, it's basically you have a lawless society. And so I've argued, and all of us have argued on this panel, have argued that when you have a lawless society, things only benefit the higher echelon people, the billionaires and millionaires, and that's where we are today. And you started this off by saying that Trump was suing himself for $12 billion, which he's going to take from taxpayers. He wants to take from taxpayers, and now he says he wants to create a 1.7 settle with himself and create a $1.75 billion trust fund that he can dispense to people who he believes suffered from the criminal prosecutions that he endured. So anyway, I don't know what the moral of the story is, but I know that that we're way worse off today than we would have been had we prosecuted the cases that Mr. Bowen brought to our attention.
It's unbelievably powerful to hear from all of you, and it's a great setup for Ms. Carbone, the Rubina Chair of Science, Law, and Technology at the University of Minnesota, who has always opened up our dialogues here as really kind of the voice of the conscience of America, in my opinion. And she just lays down incredible ideas in setting the table of what we're in the midst of. In June, last week, we had Paul introduce, of course, the Hail Mary Project after he had written the Manhattan Light Project to deal with the scourge of this corporate, corruption that now is just so unbelievable. And you've talked the last several weeks about a plan moving forward. How do you respond to your colleagues given just the power of this moment?
By the way, I think it's going to be published this weekend, so I'll circulate with everyone. Let's hope.
Can you tell us where it's going to be published?
Yeah, I think it's going to be published in the DC report, which is your
yes.
Yeah.
David
so I'm 99.9% sure it's going to be this weekend.
Outstanding.
So one of the things, in pulling this all together is how do we prevent this from happening again? And Paul's analysis and what we've been discussing over the weeks is we are going to be coming to an inflection point. My colleagues in the academy are busy talking about 2029, parallel to the 2025 project Trump implemented. But they're focused on the same things Obama was focused on in 2009, restoration, the status quo ante. We had a financial crisis. Let's get back to the point at the beginning of the financial crisis. That is, before it happened. Not how do we remake markets, not how do we deal with corruption, but how do we simply restore the point we were at the beginning. So you look at finance, you look at Wall Street. You go to 2011, Wall Street's back. You go to the average working stiff. In 2015, they're not back. That Trump gets elected in 2016, feeding into the sense that the financiers, what we could now call the Epstein class, definitely Wall Street is in bed in all kinds of ways with Epstein at the time of the financial crisis, that they were never held to account. That for all that Dodd-Frank instituted some reforms that primarily affected big banks, they certainly didn't do anything to clean up the way businesses practiced or billions are made in the United States. And so the question, what does the next round look like? And I throw it out to all of you. I mean, my questions, and Dick, I think you're a good person to start, is where do we start? I mean, again, if we were to run through the lessons from Hungary and Poland in dealing with autocracy, one, you got to deliver. Should we be focusing on making sure tariffs, with Mark Dan bringing some of the cases, that the illegal tariffs go to the little guys instead of the big companies they're going to now? Should we be focused on prosecutions? And where do you start? So on the one hand, you have incredible grift, but we can't go after all of them. We don't have the resources. Even a completely revitalized DOJ can't go after all of the grifters feeding at the Trump crowd. Is the goal a commission making clear and stamping the most corrupt administration in history on Donald Trump's forehead? Or is it prosecuting selected individuals? And if so, how do we prioritize? And then finally, the question, this is about resetting a power dynamic. We have the corruption of the Supreme Court. We have the corruption of Congress. That corruption involves in part, and it's different with the court and with Congress. With Congress, it's putting a gun to the head of every Republican and saying, you don't vote the way we tell you to, we will flood your district with incredible amounts of money to take you out in a primary. But the only people that really vote are the Trump faithful. With the Supreme Court, it's more pernicious, but the Supreme Court is owned lock, stock, and barrel by the Epstein class. And they know it. They got appointed because their ideological beliefs align with the Epstein class. They don't have to be bribed. They were there already. But that's the only reason they're on the court, and they know it. So where do we start? Any ideas?
Bill, I mean, Dick, you should lead us off. I hope.
I don't. My gosh.
You didn't know you were going to have a gun like that, did you?
Those of us that see the nuts and the bolts, and we know there is wrongdoing, and there was widespread wrongdoing in the last financial crisis. No one was prosecuted. And the issue is, and again, I can't tell you how to prioritize this, but it is imperative that at least you have some prosecutions, so that it is not just a blanket no prosecutions. And I realize obviously there's politics that goes into that, but you need to show that there has to be some accountability, even though it's not going to be accountability widespread for everyone that needs accountability. That's the only approach I know to really take. We've got to have some accountability.
Well, let me help it revert it back to William K. Black, because William K. Black was the engineer of getting the information to at one time, investigative journalism through papers in the United States to provide the non-prosecutions of these stories that would literally embarrass the DOJ into action, in his words, back in the day. But you, Bill, taught us a long time ago, and we fared it out in our work, the con, because of what we learned at the FBI based on your teachings, that it's all about the criminal referral. And we found out that what you guys did during, of course, the savings and loan crisis was this, and what happened during the great financial crisis, which was infinitely larger, was that. Yes. So do you want to talk about prioritizations, or where do you go? You tell it, because you're the one who did it.
Well, sure, but it was a complete failure at every level other than the whistleblowers. Right? So you are absolutely right. You need a criminal referral system. The criminal referral system was killed. And we don't even know of an order that killed it. Think of that. It was killed before the great financial crisis. Think about, again, in economics and regulation, we talk about revealed preferences. Don't tell me what you claim you believe. Your actions reveal what you actually believe. So even if they didn't feel they could bring a single prosecution effectively because they had screwed up the criminal referral system, what would be your first decision? To reinstate the criminal referral system, which they absolutely refused to do. So our FBI senior official who we've had on said he thinks total they received 6 referrals in the great financial crisis. We alone, just in the savings and loan, and remember, there were more crooks in banking contemporaneously than the savings and loan. We, our tiny little agency, which had no criminal referral system at the beginning. So we had to invent the criminal referral system, staff it up while dealing with a crisis that was overwhelming us, made over 30,000 criminal referrals. These people refuse to do this. They refuse to use whistleblowers, not just these super whistleblowers that we've just been discussing, Richard and Michael, but over 12,000 appraisers who signed their names to a petition. So they were identifiable, even though they were being blacklisted if they did the right thing. They were willing to do the right thing. Again, think of any other nation that's come up with 12,000 whistleblowers from just one profession in all of this, right?
Yeah, and talk about priorities. I think that to some extent that what the priorities are is exactly what William has suggested, is you listen to that first whistleblower and then you take action. I mean, in Dick's case, he had the smoking gun. He created the smoking gun.
He had a smoking gun
at Citigroup. Yeah, that they actually were putting out, investment vehicles that they knew were filled with
crappy loans,
mortgages that were absolutely unacceptable and would never have been accepted by the company if it had been just one loan. But Dick pointed out that of the $90 billion worth of mortgages, of billions of dollars of mortgages that he was supposed to rubber stamp, where 60% of them were defective.
And they grew to 80%.
Yeah. And so then what we had is the Attorney General of the United States saying that what kept him up at night is not that reality, but rather what would happen to the financial company if they prosecuted. What would happen to the company? That's what kept him up at night, not that the company had engaged in that kind of behavior.
Well, and
criminal behavior. The
Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission, after hearing all of the witnesses and so forth, they actually made, and this was sealed for 5 years, they actually made 11 criminal referrals because they were chartered. That was in the FCIC charter. If you see evidence of criminal wrongdoing, then send that evidence along with a referral for criminal prosecution to the Attorney General of the United States, who was Eric Holder. And they did. They sent 11 criminal referrals. Mine was one of them, to the Attorney General of the United States, who locked them up in his desk drawer while the 5-year statute of limitations expired.
Yeah. You know how many of those came to the fraud section?
Yeah.
Yes.
And as we've discussed, for many, many months here, is that first whistleblower coming forward. I mean, whistleblowing is contagious if people are listened to. If there is impact with that first whistleblower, there will be many more. If you have a corrupt system or a corrupt enterprise, there'll be many more. But everyone is looking toward that first whistleblower and how they're dealt with. And if they're dealt with sidelined, not listened to, impugned, put on administrative leave, then fired. If that's what they're seeing, then it's going to be the fear of not only losing their job and retaliation, it's going to be the fear of futility, which is that nothing will happen. They'll take a great risk. They'll destroy their careers, and nothing will happen. And that cynicism is exactly what has given us the system that we have now in terms of the oligarchs that are essentially running the country.
I've got to insert two things real quick. Louis, please tell us how many whistleblowers you guys are representing again.
Well, we're representing over 100 at this point, 120 some people. We have had 1,500 come to us last year, and now it looks like we're going to have it at least by the end of the year, probably or at least 2,000 additional people coming to us, way beyond our capacity to deal with. So there is not going to be a shortage of whistleblowing. If there is a change in the House, I think we'll see a multitude of whistleblowers coming forward because people will finally be listened to, at least potentially, in congressional hearings. So I do see a potential for a sea change, but we'll see.
And Dick, could you please
something along these lines that you've just been talking about? Remember how many disasters in PR Wells Fargo went through? And they wanted to say, oh, we're going to turn over a new, brush, et cetera, et cetera. There was one signal that they could have sent that everyone would have understood it and they would have known it was real. And that was to make either of these two giant whistleblowers the head of internal audit.
Amen.
No, did you get that job offer, Richard?
Yeah, I somehow missed that email.
Yeah. So revealed preferences is they never wanted to clean it up.
Yeah.
So Dick, remind our audience, and it's just such an honor to see you, especially talking about Michael Winston. Based on what Lewis just said, and of course what everybody's, teeing up, just the sacrifice. You've lived through this. Remind our viewers, I mean, that was the whole point of the con. And I had more on the shelf for season 2 that got squashed. This whole thing got squashed, but I'll save that for my closing remarks. But I mean, this really had traumatic impact. You had the weight of the world on your shoulders. Give us a sense of what it was like for you and Michael.
Well, it takes a toll. It takes a toll on you physically. It can take a toll on your family. It's very difficult, and I know this is something that Lewis is very familiar with. Michael and I were invited to be speakers at the Government Accountability Project's 40th anniversary.
Yes.
That was terrific. That was wonderful, and it was widely acknowledged that was what the issue is getting people to listen to you, and the effect that it will have on whistleblowers, because it's extremely difficult. I obviously never went to work for another bank, and don't get me wrong, I have no regrets whatsoever with what I did because it was right. And I know Michael had no regrets for what he did. But this is something that we've got to, if we have at least some whistleblowers that are listened to and their evidence acted upon, then that gives additional incentive to those whistleblowers that are potentially there. And I know Louis is very familiar with that.
I'm also familiar with the fact that every time Richard would speak, he was under threat from the institution that he came from, and he, famously, I still have on my shelves the Tums that he sent to me, because each time before he spoke, I would have to tell him, you're under threat by that company when you speak, and he would say, I understand that. You've done your duty. You've warned me. I'm going to speak anyway.
Here's some Tums,
which probably includes today, as well. I mean, it takes an incredible amount of courage, and that courage needs to be understood, not only understood, appreciated, and celebrated.
Agreed. And I have to insert this kind of funny small world scenario. I had an interview recently with a guy who's involved with the national security, social security, social security story, Lewis, and by way of DOJ and all of the data, the greatest heist of data in the history of the world. And he was telling us the inside story, and it happened to also the Brad Bondi had some connection to this story, just so you know, Mr. Bowen. And you can't escape the circle of the Bondis, all of this stuff. But I want to leave it to anybody else to give us some closing comments before I offer mine. Anybody want to kind of give some parting thoughts here?
Yeah, I'll use Yeats' thoughts. Think where man's glory begins and ends, and say it rests in my friends like this.
Anyone else?
No, just thank you, Dick. It's great seeing you again, and we honor you and Michael, obviously.
Thank you.
Family.
So please allow me to offer this. So my name is Patrick Lovell. I have nothing to offer by way of my professional, CV to the people that are here. They lend their time to this broadcast because I had the great fortune to be able to ask questions that the entirety of media covered up, that the entirety of government covered up. We're not talking a small situation here. We're all going, those paying attention to Epstein, it's comparing apples to oranges, but there's a lot of cover up and similarities, and there's always patterns how these things work. But ultimately, there's 1,200 to 1,600 victims, I understand, roughly, that they've identified in these these Democratic oversight committees. We're talking literally tens of millions of people, okay, that were caught up in something that led to trillions of dollars that went to the bad guys or GDP blow up. Don't want to, go into all the details of that. But what I'm trying to tell you is, look, it's up to you, the people. You got to understand, this whole thing's quashed. We should be watched by hundreds of thousands of people. There's a thing called algorithms. There's all sorts of ways these things get manipulated. You're looking at people that were vetted by 60 Minutes and, literally the top echelons of what our government is. These guys are the pros, the best that the United States has ever delivered. You cannot remain silent. Silence is complicity. You have to like, subscribe, and share, and understand we have professionals here that have the record. They've done it for decades. We've got to take the power back. And the only way that's going to happen, given everything we've seen with all of these mega mergers and acquisitions and this oligarchic scenario where the richest amongst us can just take and take and take and literally do what? Build AI data centers to spy on us, to destroy the environment and, and what? Throw people in gulags? This is 2026, and this isn't a joke. This isn't a Orwellian fictional movie that we've seen a million times. This is our reality. And it pisses me off. And I'll tell you right now, Michael Winston leaned in and he never quit. Richard Bowen leaned in and he never quit. Gary leaned in and never quit. Every single person are the heroes that show up, and we have to do right by them. Because unless you want to go get your musket on the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, given this insanity that we're all in, let's show some support to people who know how the system works, and to you journalists out there, and to you gatekeepers. And I'm going to name names. Hi, David Sirota. Nice to see you. Hi, Alex Gibney. Nice to see you too. Hey, David Enrich. We got stories. There are thousands of whistleblowers. And of course, your paper does all the great work. You work with the Government Accountability Project. But there's no time to lose. There is no time. The midterms are coming. We have to get the American people to understand these gargantuan stories of criminal activity that now control the country. That's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. So please join us. And thank you so much to everybody here. I appreciate you as always. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.